what I think the missed opportunity is, and I talk about this all the time, is the network effect of co-working. So you think about a GWA or a GCUC conference, people in the room, owners and operators, that is an enormous amount of buying power, and there's an enormous amount of shared buying power there as well. That's why I always talk about, if people aren't looking at the co-working or flex space vertical as part of their strategy for sales, they probably need to reevaluate that, because it's incredibly productive. There are so many human beings who work within these spaces in this industry.
Jessica, welcome to the Future of Work podcast. I'm really excited to have you here today. It's not often we get to focus just on the flexible workspace, and I know your expertise is perfect for this conversation. Today, as we talk about the future of work, I really want us to focus on the topic of agility, how important agility is, and the foundation of agility really is in the flexible workspace and the co-working industry as it relates to officing. You see a lot of data because of your company's work across the entire spectrum of the industry. What trends are you seeing that's driving the agility issue, or that's driving the industry, or driving people to consider flexible workspace as a solution as opposed to conventional workspace?
Oh, that's such a fun question,
Three
Frank.
questions, three questions all over. Sorry.
No, it's great. It's great. So I think that there are two interesting contributing factors. I think there is one that's coming internally from inside the industry, and something that is coming from outside the industry where the market is driving that demand. So, for example,
let's focus on what's coming from outside, because that's what expands the industry.
That's exactly right. So we're seeing, obviously there has been return to work and return to office and things like that. I think what's really interesting and exciting for the flexible workspace industry is that we're seeing a lot of people picking up co-working memberships for their staff and things like that. We're seeing large corporates implement co-working spaces for their teams as well. I think Hewlett Packard just made a big statement where they're going to be moving people remote or into co-working as well. So it's interesting to see some of these macro factors that drive growth inside of the industry. I think that behavior has been really interesting to observe.
Well, it's interesting that you say that. We have Alliance Virtual Offices too, not
Yep.
with all work, and 70, also just say 75%. 75%, we're servicing over 315,000 accounts, so we're the largest virtual office provider globally. And 70% of our customers, or 75% of our customers, are institutional grade customers. They're not onesie twosie things. They're large institutional grade customers. So that really supports, if you look at it, if I'm a 75% structure there across the whole industry, that has to be a major trend that is starting to raise itself overall at the industry level. Why do companies like Alliance Virtual or IWG or WeWork, why are we seeing that trend of major institutional structures where a lot of the smaller operators, even though they have great locations and honestly from time to time much better services than some of the largest operators, why are they not seeing that institutional trend the same way that we are?
I think, obviously one contributing factor is mass and scale and availability. So, an institutional large corporate customer might be looking for something in major metropolitan areas. Typically the WeWorks and Industrious and, Alliance, things like that, will see, you're in major cities where they can put their people. So that's one thing. I think that's definitely a pretty major contributing factor. I also think that, and this remains to be seen, but I think that we are seeing a maturity in the industry as well. I think co-working is no longer just that fun neighborhood place where you can go get a coffee and, meet some people. And yes, it is very much still that. It's just the public maybe has taken a little bit longer to catch up to that. We've known this all along, right?
Sure.
And I think now that there is a lot more optionality available. So, I run a company, I've got 100 employees, they're all remote across America. I have options where I can choose to put 5 of my employees who are in St. Louis into a really great local co-working space, and they're really happy there. But I also have 50% of my team who are in New York. I can put them into a WeWork, and then they've got locations all over the world.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of high-low optionality is really great for the end user and for the customer and people who are looking to really look after their teams. Find them a good work home.
I agree with you. We sort of have a 10 offices in 10 countries in 10 cities in 10 minutes concept.
Yep.
That you should
Yep.
you our industry should be able to serve that way overall.
But that's what I like about Flex, though, is we can do both.
Exactly.
There is
Exactly.
something for everybody, and we've seen this emergence with wellness focused spaces. You can go and get red light therapy or a therapy session, or go see a doctor and also get work done and have a meeting with a client, and stand at a standing desk or a walking desk, or get a ketogenic lunch delivered to your desk. We're seeing all of these options available, and I love that our industry has driven that behavior for the end user, for our community.
Well, I think when we talk about agility,
Hmm.
we're usually referencing short-term leases, things of that nature that large companies or all companies need. We all need to be agile today. Flexibility and agility, no company, large or small, can do well without it. But when you think
Correct.
about agility, really, from what you just said, delivered keto lunches, that's a form of agility. Stand-up desks, that's a form of agility. All the things
Hmm.
you want tailored to your particular need rather than just being in a cube farm somewhere.
And
All
what
of
I what I
those things all of those things are forms of agility that, are critical to the way a 5-generation company with 5 generations of team members needs to be
Yeah.
thinking, because we don't just need agility for economics or for liabilities or for balance sheet. We need it because we have 5 different generations of people in the office today, all working together, and they have totally different requirements.
And the beautiful thing about that agility is that there's a home for everybody. So there's the agility, but then there's also the hospitality components that come along with it as well. And I think marrying those two things together, is where we really see the growth. And as millennials, Gen X, Gen Z start to grow up and take higher positions in companies, they're becoming the decision makers. These having the freedom of choice and to choose what space is going to work best for you and for their team, they sort of get to do it in a different way. And again, that choice and flexible workspaces, being agile and being able to pivot and offer these things to best service their customer, like, that's a really interesting moment in time for our industry.
Well, we've been trying to wed all commercial officing in one way or another, which flexible workspace is part of, really, um,
Yes.
has been trying to wed concepts of hospitality and services for decades and decades now. And I see, as I look out across the flexible workspace industry, different brands doing different things, but I don't yet see the the return to the old service models that used to be around before, I'll say before the even the mid-90s was when the highlight of
Yeah.
services were around. And again, that's a 5
Mhm.
generation thing. I've seen that. A lot of
Mhm.
people have never even seen that. Um, where it was really a service-based industry that maybe was real estate dependent, and now I think we're part of a real estate industry that's trying to get back to services. What's your view on that, and how do you see the revenue that's generated by centers? How do you see the ratios in revenues between workspace, in all categories versus service provision in all categories as a ratio? Because that's really the telling number.
Yes. So it's been interesting with WorkSpace Geek because a lot of our clients are mostly serviced offices, and they sort of operate in a way where it's, very much, you have an office and that's sort of the way it works. And they are full and busy and productive, and they've really honed in on their cost of goods. They know what their margins are. They are agile, and that they pivot and change spaces based on what the market is demanding. Um, the the ratio is interesting. I sort of categorize this industry in sort of two ways. You sort of we do this one thing, you come in here, it's a little bit old school maybe, and then we have more co-working where it's you
Mhm.
have yoga, you have coffee, you have whatever. Neither is better than the other. Both there is clearly market and demand for both of
Right.
those pathways, if you will. The ratio is interesting for me when you are a more sort of hospitality, very service driven, if you want to call it a flexible workspace. And I have found it really interesting. A lot of places they want to add all of these amenities. And I sort of call it amenities gone wild, if you
Uh-huh.
will. They don't, you think, oh, I'll do this and I'll do this and I'll do this. And sometimes there is an uptake, whatever. I find the places that do it the best is they listen a lot to their client base or their community. They hear a lot about what they want, what people are asking for. They let there sort of be a repetition of these sorts of requests before they really do implement something, because you still have to run a business and you still have to pay the bills, right? So I think marrying together the hospitality and the being really business savvy is where I see people doing it the best, where that sort of inflection point is. Um, and I think also, you can bleed a little bit into your margins when you start offering more and more amenities, but there are also like sort of things you can do that have high impact but that don't cost you a lot in terms of the margin either. So I find that tension to be really interesting to observe as well.
Well, as I go back in time, business centers
Mm-hmm.
becoming serviced offices, co-working grow out of that, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
were very heavily provided clerical, secretarial, and administrative services,
Yes.
well as meeting room services, which everybody still does today, et cetera. Um, it represented 15, 20, 25% of their total revenue. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's evaporated within the industry or hugely diminished and been replaced by what you're saying, amenities, things that attract people that are uh, a variety of what I'll call self-serve items
Mm-hmm.
that don't really generate revenue. And yet, the fastest growing independent employment structure in the United States, at least, and probably globally, according to Upwork and a few others, are virtual assistants.
Yes.
So, why aren't centers with all of their critical mass within the center itself, 100, 200, 300 customers, including virtuals, establishing their own virtual assistant structure effectively and servicing their clients to help their clients grow their businesses more so than just providing entities?
I mean, did you just invent a new business, Frank? Is that going to be the next thing that you do?
No, it's the old business. It's the old
Well,
business.
I mean, this is what's fascinating. There is very much a return, if you will. So, I I think that I think it's happening in really hyper local ways, and in terms of supporting businesses that you know help in terms of flex offices that help grow their businesses or provide business services in that way. There are a few examples of it, but it's not necessarily baked into some of the larger organizations either. What I think the missed opportunity is, and I talk about this all the time, is the network effect of co-working. So you think about a GWA or a GCUC conference. You have 300-400 people in the room, owners and operators. They probably represent somewhere between 500,000 to 800,000 human beings, depending on who's in the room. That is an enormous amount of buying power, and there's an enormous amount of shared buying power there as well. So that's why I always talk about, if people aren't looking at the co-working or flex space vertical as part of their strategy for sales, they probably need to reevaluate that, because it's incredibly productive. There are so many human beings who work within these spaces in this
No,
industry.
I agree. I agree with you. It's also hugely fragmented, though.
It is hugely fragmented, yes.
We all talk about the big guys, IWG, WeWork,
Hmm.
Industrious, a few others. Um, they have maybe 15, maximum 20% of the industry. They're
Yeah.
big, they're noisy, they're powerful because
Hmm.
everybody else is a two center operator.
Hmm.
2.6 centers is the average across the industry.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. And so the difference between 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 of those 2.6 center operators versus one 5,000 center operator in terms of voice is massive. So I think somehow as an industry, we need to reverse the who is heard and how it's done, and consider that when we talked about how big the industry is, and how much it really
Mm,
matters. When we talk about
mm,
community, you hit on community and the co-working centers, and an emphasis there, and the different types of centers. I would say that uh, we're in the flexible workspace industry. It's built up of different brand structures. Serviced offices are one, and their brand promise is professional image and services. Co-working would be business growth through a collaborative community, incubators, accelerators, et cetera. There are a
mhm.
whole variety of different structures. Co-working and serviced offices are the two largest by far. Co-working is, I think, becoming the most recognized um, uh, uh, in terms of the industry itself. Um, and therein lies some confusion because everybody says they're co-working when actually they're really not.
And that's okay, by the way.
I agree. I agree. I
There is a
agree.
lid for every pot, as my grandmother would say, and I think I sort of, the analogy that I use is a little bit like ice cream flavors. You
Yep.
might love mint chocolate chip, and this particular
True.
location you're looking at
True.
is not mint chocolate chip, or you
I
might
love
love
mint
Rocky Road.
chocolate chip. That
Well, there
used to
you
be
go.
my favorite. That used to be my favorite. No, I think you're really right, and that's why I say, going to one or the other, doesn't matter, overall. What
Correct.
matters is the individual brand promise of the individual company and their fulfillment of that brand promise. So,
Hmm.
services versus community, you can combine the 2, or you could be focused on one or the other. Location, you mentioned central business districts, some of the larger operators. Actually, we see the biggest growth within the industry and within the customer demand in the secondary markets right now.
Oh, the secondary market is, I someone needs to write something. I mean, there probably has been, but I think the data around that is so fascinating.
Yeah.
But it does make sense, because if we look at, you know some of these larger organizations who are providing, workspaces for their teams who are remote, maybe, I mean, what's the point in me? I live, if I have to commute for 2 hours to get to my co working space, I may as well just work from home. But if
Yep.
there's something that's a mile from my house, that makes far more
Well,
sense, and
it,
it's far more lifestyle driven.
it's funny. We've been in this industry a long time, and in 1979, we were starting to build buildings, and
Hmm.
I commissioned a marketing study. I had no budget, by the way. It was biggest expense I'd had so far.
I
A
love
big,
that.
big marketing study, and so we had this firm do an interesting review, and it was a major firm, so it was a major expense. They put out a
Hmm.
book. There was only three things actually, that were important in that study. One was people prefer. This is so obvious. People prefer to work 5 minutes from their residence and 30 minutes from their customers, as opposed to 30 minutes from their residence and 5 minutes from their customers. Eh, Captain Obvious, right? That's
Not
so so obvious for most people. The other thing, was, that everybody hates commuting. No one
It's
no
a
one
waste of time.
no one likes to commute. So we go, okay, that's obvious too. No one likes to commute. I was living in LA at the time, and LA traffic, no one likes that overall. And then the other thing that was interesting when it came to location, because we're doing a lot of traffic studies and such, because we're building buildings. They said made this comment. I've always thought about it when we look at a location. Decision makers live on curvy streets. Non-decision makers live on straight streets.
Right.
They could have said wealthy people live on curvy streets, non-wealthy people live on streets. But they said decision makers. And that really influenced a lot of our development of centers and location choice throughout the years. And even today in our aggregation side of our business, when we look at centers that we want to work with, we pay attention to those three things from 1979.
Yeah.
And don't think a lot of people do. Um,
I don't think a lot of people do either. It's interesting. I mean, obviously, I'm from New Zealand. I'm not from America, and I
really?
moved to pop quiz. Everyone at the end of this podcast has to mimic my accent and then submit it to me.
Uh-oh, can't do it.
Everyone gets a sheep if they win. So I moved to Los Angeles when I was 24, and I used to commute from the east side, Pasadena, over to Santa Monica for my job. And I was about 2 hours in traffic each way every day. And, New Zealand is a hyper regional place. We have a couple of larger cities,
Uh-huh.
which generally are the size of a suburb in most major cities in America. And, my office was a 10-minute walk from my house always, or a 5-minute drive, or you can pop home and do some laundry on your lunch break, or you can, everything is very close by. So the socialization that comes with that is so much healthier, and everything is very neighborhood and very community and very hyper local. And I think that, people, and especially people of my, I'm an older millennial, they want more of that, and I find it so interesting that we're seeing that also as a trend in the flex and co-working industry as well. I think commuting is such a horrific waste of time in every avenue. It's bad for your mental health, it's bad for the environment. I mean, there are so many
Yeah,
things about it.
yeah.
Walking is good for you. Bumping into people on the street and colliding with other human beings is very good for you. I think that's why co-working is so good
Yes.
for you as well. I mean, I work from co-working spaces, I work remote in the work that I do, and sometimes I'll have a conversation with someone who's starting a CPG sock company, and they've figured out this really cool outreach marketing nugget of information I get from them, and I can go and put that into action in my own work. And I think it's endlessly fascinating, the people that you get to bump into.
No, I agree. You make the point about commuting and the environment. In the United States, we had what's called the Clean Air Act. Uh,
Mhm.
that was very popular in the 90s, early through the mid 90s.
Mhm.
Overall, in fact, we actually wrote the definition of what a telecommuting center was for the Clean Air Act, and
Oh,
we built
wow.
a variety of telecommuting centers for the state of California's Air Quality Management District and ran them for the state. And it was a very no one really knew what they were doing. The government didn't know what they were doing overall, and they forced people into these telecommuting centers. All companies that had more than 50 employees at a single location actually had to file a Clean Air Act document that said how they were complying with certain things. X amount of
Mhm.
carpooling, X amount of van pooling, Y amount of people in telecommuting centers, blah, 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 all this sort of thing. And after about 2 years, people started liking it, and then after about 4 years, the government administration changed in Washington, and they no longer had the will to enforce it. The new
Mm.
administration changed, and so it all just went but there was a perfect example of benefit from reduction in commute and the way we
Mm,
commute and the way we do things that was
yeah,
measurable economically, environmentally, et cetera. And the U.S. government lost the will to manage that effectively.
right,
And
right,
what employers found back at that time was their own employees liked it, and their own employees were voluntarily doing a whole variety of things that contributed to the process, and it all went away. It all went away.
I
Uh,
mean, who would have thought that happy human beings make happy employees, which then has so many trickle down effects? I mean,
you
it's
know,
it's very simple.
but what was strange was the government stopped enforcing the program, and the companies themselves let it all die away. They didn't continue to participate or on their own where they could have. That was an opportunity lost, definitely,
Mm,
overall, and hopefully we won't do that again in the future. When we talk about this and commuting and services and community, application of technology, what is AI doing inside of the services industry, inside of flexible workspace today to improve it rather than isolate individuals that are using AI within centers or on their own where they don't think they need to participate because they've got a, I don't need to bump into somebody on the street because I've got my AI friend. There's a whole transition going on in the psyche of work. Uh,
yeah.
what do you think the flexible workspace sectors opportunity, responsibility, reaction,
Mm.
see all that playing out?
I mean, the very notion of someone saying they don't need to go out into the world because they have their AI friend is bone chilling to me.
It's there though.
Um,
It's there,
I know it is. I know it is.
and it's growing, especially in Gen Z and Gen Alpha.
Certainly, certainly. I will say it's been interesting to observe this trend and change happening. And so I'm 41. And so I remember talking to my dad about, he was an orchardist and we had an orchard in New Zealand. And he would talk, and I would talk to him about the way that I was working, and he thought it was so cool and modern, but it wasn't something that he was able to necessarily identify with. And now I find myself having these conversations with Gen Z and Gen Alpha, who I employ and work with and hire. And I find myself learning so much from the way that they think, the way that they talk about being in the world, the way that they think about working, because their baseline is so inherently different to what my baseline was when I graduated from university. So there is an expectation around flexibility, being able to work from home. I want to catch a yoga class, and sometimes that's at 10 o'clock in the morning. I can work around that and design my own schedule. And I actually think that's really, really fantastic. Um, However, I also, there are some trends that show us that Gen Z and Gen Alpha actually socialize in a way that's a little more offline and agnostic. We're seeing, I don't know if you've seen some of those YouTube clips and viral clips of university addresses where they're talking about AI and they're getting booed off stage and that kind of thing. I think there is also a lot of fear and concern from that generation because they've all grown up to a certain point. They're all working within the world, and then this new technology's come along that's going to wipe out a lot of opportunity. I'd be pretty annoyed, to put it lightly, as well. Um, so I think that there. Oh,
I have to interrupt you for a second. The question: do you really think that AI is going to wipe out all the opportunity for Gen Z, or do you think Gen
no,
Z is not mature enough yet to recognize the opportunities that it will create instead?
I can understand why there would be concern and fear, and it's sort of like a structure that you're sort of growing up and working towards a certain structure and a way of doing life and working, and that structure seems to be unstable at the moment and there is a reforming happening. I can imagine it would be a rather tenuous place to be where there's an unstable structure that you're sort of used to. I think that there is probably also some overcorrection and some fear because they're young and they don't necessarily know. And I think that things will even themselves out. Um, but I think a lot of it remains to be seen. I think there's a lot of responsibility on these companies as well. But the one thing I will say is I think that there are sort of two patterns emerging for me. I think that there are people who are they have their AI friends, their life is very much inside. I also think that there is a growing trend of a more offline way of living and socializing in younger generations as well.
Yeah, I hope so. One thing when you say is that um, these students are in an unstable environment, I would agree because the world is unstable.
Correct.
The world has always been unstable.
I mean,
The
I
world, the
graduated
world
right when
will
the
always, yeah, the world
yeah,
will always be unstable. So I
that is
wonder if
correct.
this
Yes.
reaction is a first world US pampered reaction versus a second or third world, I'm going to use this to get ahead reaction.
I mean, listen, I'm the daughter of a farmer. I Nothing has ever been stable
Oh
for me
my!
in my
Well, I'm
entire
not the
life.
daughter of a
Yeah.
farmer, but I'm farming and ranching family.
I know nothing of stability, and I work in the startup space. Again, I don't know much about stability, so I live in that place.
Yeah.
But the world is also not designed for my comfort, So, um, but yes, I think that things will settle down eventually, but it's also very new as well.
Well, it's funny about farming. My dad always used to say, "Well, better to be lucky than smart, because smart don't make it rain."
100%, 100%. Yeah,
So you get into that kind of environment sometimes. Well, let's kind of move back over to flexible work. We're going all over the place here, but I think it's good because it talks to that main subject of agility.
yeah.
And the need for more agility in the world because it is unstable, and speed. They say it's
Mhm.
not the large that eats the small, it's the fast that eats the slow. So speed and agility become two components together. Your reaction time is as important as your reaction itself. Overall, I think that one of the benefits of flexible work in our industry overall is that it does allow speed in reaction time to new environments and new business
Yeah.
models, et cetera, much more so than historically traditional real estate and officing has done so. So I think we've got an advantage there that's pretty strong. How do you see over the next 3 to 5 years, where do you see the flexible workspace industry going? Based on all the data that you see, based on the commercial real estate data that you all see, where do you think the industry's headed?
Um, I I think it will continue to grow. I mean, we know it will continue to grow, and I think that there will be more. I think we'll see more and more niche spaces as well. I think that trend will continue to emerge. I was talking about sort of this wellness workspace
Hmm.
trend. I think that will continue to emerge, which is really interesting to observe. I think multi-use buildings where there's co-working and maybe corporate offices and there's gyms and that kind of thing as well. I think a more holistic integration into the way that we live. I think co-working really set the trend for that, and I think co-working and flex, I think we'll continue to see that happen as well. I think the localization second tier market will continue to grow. I think the demand will drive that as well. I think from a technological perspective, we're seeing more and more space. We're seeing spaces where they're sort of unstaffed or very lightly staffed, maybe with AI and the emergence of technology. We may begin to see more and more of that. As we know, flexible offices and co-working and serviced offices all operate on relatively narrow margins. People cost is often the thing that drives the growth, but is the most expensive thing. So maybe that.
Without people, you can't provide service,
So that is absolutely correct.
and service is key to a serviced office and
That's exactly right. Yeah.
hospitality. Um,
Yeah. And I think what I so I think that there probably will be some people who give it a go and, really go for the unstaffed model and do that kind of thing. I also think, again, there is a rising trend in the analog of life. Like the events industry is exploding because experiential, in-person, tactile experiences are really what people want. And I think that hiring for people who can create those experiences, run communities, build communities, design great programming or experiential marketing, whatever it might be, I think that those spaces will do really, really well. And we look at the growth of places like Kiln or the Melon, maybe, they're absolutely beautiful environments to sit in every single day. And they have excellent services as well. And, they're growing. And I think we'll see more and more of that as well. So
Well,
I again, like, I think we'll sort of see those two things emerge in tandem.
well, I would agree. I think services will come back in one way or another. There are two ways to provide them. First, you can hire the people and figure it out and do it yourself to your own community. Secondly, you can do what you were suggesting we do or someone else do, and that you can outsource an awful lot of the the requirements through partnerships that are
Hmm.
created either with technology structures today, and when it comes to experience, a business or a co-working center is an excellent organizational platform for experiences that you don't have to do yourself, but you can organize to be done for others. And I
Yeah.
think there's not enough of that in the industry. I think people
Mm.
like to do more, but they just don't quite get it done or know how to do it.
Yeah.
And maybe there's an opportunity for a company to emerge within the industry to focus on providing that kind of service to the operators, so in turn it can be passed along to their customers.
Mm.
Uh,
Well, I think what we see as well, and you probably see in your line of work, Frank. I think that as the technology systems that support these flexible co-working, executive offices, becomes more mature, and integration systems are obviously a
yeah,
very key part of this. I think as they become more sophisticated, AI gets implemented even more. It allows a little more breathing room for people to actually curate and have more fun, actually,
yeah,
building these communities and really focusing on the in-person stuff. Because if your billing is automated and taken care of, or your tour booking from your website is automated and taken care of, or your follow-up cadence for a new lead is automated and taken care of, that frees up a lot of time. And I remember my, at Nextbase, back in, God, was it 2009? Oh no, 2012 I started there, and we built our own proprietary system. It took us an hour and 15 minutes to onboard a new person. And
yeah,
there was one day where we were so busy, we were onboarding new people every day. Um, if I could have taken that load away from me and focused on my community a little bit more, like, obviously you do the best you can at the time with what's available to you, and that was considered efficient. We just had so many truncated systems. Um, I think it would be a wonderful thing to be able to run a space now with really great automation, that runs seamlessly in the background, and then you can really focus on the
yeah.
actual
I,
in-person stuff.
I agree. That would allow for higher quality services, which would allow for longer customer
Hmm.
life cycle and customer value models, which
Correct.
would allow for higher staff, uh,
Hmm.
larger staff structures, better
Yeah.
training, all of those sorts of things together. What's the one thing that you think people can do that would be a change across the industry or across the world for that matter that would impact the industry? What's the one thing that everybody should say? Well, wait a second, it's Friday. I got to go do this Monday morning early. What's the one thing?
At the risk of sounding like a huge nerd, look at your data and your analytics. I think if you can wrap a narrative around your numbers and understand the behavior based on the data and the metrics in your space, you'll be far, far better off.
Well,
And the world needs more co-working. It needs more community. We need these spaces to be thriving and to be operationally efficient and agile. Turn a meeting room into an office, vice versa, flip it around, paint the wall navy. I don't know. um, I think all of these things help co-working spaces thrive and be better, and then there's more community for people.
I couldn't agree more. We have a mantra in our own company that says, get the data. Data becomes information, which
Hmm.
turns into knowledge, and knowledge allows action. So get the data. And we
Yeah.
practice that every single day. And we started doing
Hmm.
that in the 80s when marketing material, we were looking at our marketing, and we recognized that we looked at our finances at the end of the month, and we looked at our marketing at the beginning of the month for what we were going to do next month.
Mm.
Then the internet came along in the 90s and we reversed everything. We said, if we don't look at our marketing first as a forecasting structure for what we expect next month's finances to be like, then we're making a big mistake. So we started looking at all that data together.
You
Uh,
have to.
you really have to overall, and the sources of data we have today are so much better than we had in the 80s, 90s, even early mid 2000s.
Hmm.
Companies
I've
like
got
yours
oh,
are huge contributors to that, and it's very, very important.
there is one other thing I was going to say. The one thing, I'm a sales girl. That's my background. I didn't know I was a salesperson when I got my first co-working job. I thought I was just helping people. It took me 2 years to realize I was a salesperson.
Sales through service.
Correct, correct. And the thing that I find interesting, and I've worked across many startups and many industries now, people tend to try and they spend a lot of time trying to fix what's broken and what's not working. I think people don't they don't look at what is working and what they can turn up or pour gasoline on and really really amplify, because I think it's our human nature, especially those who are entrepreneurial or they run their own offices and co-working spaces and things like that. We tend to want to try and do it the hard way, but I think that it's far easier to see what's working and amplify that rather than fix something that's really broken. You can put that aside for a while, maybe come back to it later on if you really want to. But it goes back to that agility.
Yep, that's probably a good place for us to start and stop today.
Right.
So we're starting to run a little bit long in time, but
Yes.
that accelerate concept by looking at what you're doing right rather than focusing on correcting small things that are wrong. Probably a
Hmm.
little bit of a mind shift that we all should have. And it puts us in the positive instead of the negative. That's a strength. So I thank you for
Yeah.
that thought very, very much, and look forward to the next time we chat.
Me too. Thank you, Frank.
All righty. Take care.
You too. Look after yourself.
If it's impacting the future of work, it's in the Future of Work podcast by allwork.space.